Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. Please go down, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell if you want to see another video, if you want to see any of our videos, anything newly released. Go to the About section. There's the t-shirts, the Dutch Hunter Rendezvous, Legend of the Superstition Mountains, black, gray, long sleeve, short sleeve. Leave a comment if you desire to do so. But most of all, thank you for watching this week. Before we get too far into this, thank you for everybody pitched in at the Dutch Hunter Rendezvous. We had a really good time. Great time always. As always, thank you to the Dons of Arizona for sponsoring us out there and all. We had another good turnout like last year. So still a bit kind of watching the COVID thing, but still had a great turnout, had a great time. Couple late night campfires, probably the Saturday night after the guest speakers sat around. Very fortunate to have those evenings. Sat there with my son Trevor and Jesse Feldman, Salvador Delgadillo, Jeremiah Hopper came by, brought some beers and sat down with us. Kim Johnson, Frank Augustine, and a group of us just sat there till like 1, 2 in the morning, talking all kinds of things, treasure hunting and memories and this and that. So I had a great time. Thank you guys for coming and hanging out, but great time, great weather. So thanks to everybody, Kristen Gibbons for those great signs we've had the last few years and for bringing them in and putting them up and taking them down. So everyone who pitched in had a great time. Robert Kesselring and Bill Blackwell come out and talked a bit. Jesse Feldman gave us word on Jack San Felice, and so it was a really good time. We had a great time. So I hope to see everybody there next year, but let's get on to the video this week. Now this week, a bit something different. Just took a trip right after the rendezvous and then did another trip. Went down to close to the border down there, south of Tucson, and the first stop we made was the Presidio. The Presidio was a Spanish garrison that was down in southern Arizona. It was one of the first some of the early Spanish settlements down there, and literally just everybody was just getting completely just wiped out by the Pimas. So it was decided by the Spanish government to build a fort down there, have a garrison of soldiers. It wasn't, you always think of these forts and the stuff, of course, movies. It was just giant places. They're not usually as big as you expect, and they're usually very narrow. I always find that odd, how narrow the missions and everything are inside. But they decided to establish that down in there, and so the Presidio in Tubac was established, and they began trying to settle back into the area again. Now, like I said, the Spanish were settling around 1691, and just everything gets wiped out. So they decide to completely put in the Presidio. It's about 1752, so it takes about 40-50 years. The Presidio, I believe, is called the Presidio San Ignacio de Tubac. If you go down there, one thing you want to do is go to Tubac Jack's Saloon. The food there, everybody had just raved about the green chili burritos, the shrimp tacos, the pulled pork. You'll smell it coming down. It's on the main drive there, but food was excellent. But small little town, a little bit quaint. A lot of shops and stuff, but central in town, obviously, the Presidio. And there's not much left of the Presidio. There's only a wall or two standing. There is a staircase that you can go underground and see the levels where they did the excavations before. It is not a well-preserved site. There's a nice museum, excellent museum you can walk through. There's a schoolhouse there, St. Anne's Church, which I think was the third church built there. Other two churches destroyed. So it has a lot of great history. It kind of shows you kind of the evolution of the settling of various different people there. So it's a trip well worthwhile because it kind of culturally kind of explains something of the area and what was happening through the Spanish, through the Mexican independence times, up into the Gadsden Purchase and the Gadsden situation, and Charles Poston kind of coming up in there. And Charles Poston, when he came through, brought in the first printing press and the first newspaper in Arizona. So that's kind of interesting too. So you're seeing kind of that southern Arizona as things are developing during that period. And right after that period, the Gadsden Purchase, 1854, in that period, is when Jacob Waltz would arrive in Arizona. The Apaches completely destroyed the place again, like in 1776, and everybody goes to Tucson. And then it was the Mexican independence, or before that, the Spanish tried to reestablish the place. They used the Pimas, the Tohono O'odhams as soldiers and had Spanish officers there, but that fails again. So they're just, by the time of Spanish independence, they're again trying to settle it. And it wasn't until the Gadsden Purchase that again it settled, but it's finally ultimately just abandoned. And it's just because the settlement, everything was just having such a problem. There's also a bit of a hijinks involved in land ownership there and a number of other things. At the same time, this settlement's being established, 1691, just south, 2-3 miles south, is an area known as Tumakakori. And that area, more interesting, I guess, if you want, because we're always interested, and there's always the talk of the Jesuits and the missions and Kino and that type of stuff involved with, especially a lot of the Stowe Map guys. And so that's your next place, obviously, is just to get in the car after you've walked this whole grounds, toured everything, learned what you can, and it does make references to that nearby mission, and you travel just down the road, just south to Tumakakori. Now, Tumakakori, is an interesting place, a very difficult thing to say for some people. There's a few people there who weren't quite getting the hang of it. I think it's supposed to be like where the place where the wild chilies get grown, but it also supposedly, I think it's in Pima, supposed to mean the place of the flat rock, which tells you never know what anybody's talking about. Maybe you can find yourself a Pima. Another interesting thing, I'm using the word Tohono O'odham, is the Papagos, because sometimes people go, whatever happened to the Papagos? Well, the Papagos are the Tohono O'odham. They didn't like the name Papago. Well, that wasn't the name they called themselves by. That's kind of a name they were called. Papago means bean eater, so we can all understand. They probably didn't want to be known as the bean eaters. So they became the Tohono O'odham. And that's why you'll see that name all over Phoenix, in various places, and their established reservations. So and those guys, obviously being just 2-3 miles away from the Presidio, San Ignacio, they have the same problems happening here. Now, the first mission church is built on the east side of the Santa Cruz, and that one doesn't last very long, obviously, because the Apaches and everybody says the Pimas go, no, not going to happen here. So it doesn't matter if you're Jesuit or Franciscan. And they literally leveled it. When I went down by the Santa Cruz River, I wasn't aware, didn't have any idea where that site was, or I would have probably crossed and went over there and tried to look for it. I guess from what I've seen and some of the material I picked up that there must not be much remaining, because I didn't see any photographs. They probably just completely razed it to the ground. So when you're down there at Tumakakori, it interesting, I think it's one of the first 2 missions established in southern Arizona, and Kino did come through there. Now, it would be one of the later missions, because the second one, again, like, it's destroyed as well. It's pretty much leveled and taken out in the church there and everything. So then we move on to the third one, which is sometime in the 1750s, and they finally established that one. And the Franciscans get in there, and that one lasts for a while. But again, the Apaches start going through, and it starts raiding it, and so then that place is literally destroyed. And now they built the third mission, and the third mission is standing. It's not a restored mission; it's partially restored. They've restored it for like historical sakes, but they're not going to try to go through the length of completely restoring it, which leaves it very interesting, because you when you visit the Presidio, there's almost nothing left, and you see what's happened to these things. And then you come to the next one, and when you get to Tumakakori, you realize this is the third mission, and you look at the shape it's in, and there's a lot there to look at. But it's very interesting because you realize, wow, they wiped them out not only once, not only twice, but you can tell the third time, they were trying to push them on out of there. And it was just a constant argument fight. The Spanish, and even when the Mexican government, and even once the United States and the Gadsden purchased, there still were problems down there. So when you look at these things and think of them in terms of like, well, there was a mission and the friendly, happy people all working there, not necessarily. And the mission necessarily didn't have the garrison type style thing. But Tumakakori is interesting. So there's a lot to see on the sites and various things. The mission is standing for the most part, the fundamental building there. You have the cemetery. The cemetery is pretty well intact. A number of marked graves, graffiti. Some of the graffiti, I think, went back into this 1700s that I was able to find and locate. And they've left that, where they've tried to seal up the walls or fix the walls. They've left a lot of the historical graffiti. There's they have some remnants of some buildings in the open grounds. Of course, there was obviously a settlement surrounding this, and this is obviously the third mission because it's still standing. They have representations of what was there. Very nice museum as well. But it's a very short trip through the orchard. You go down, and the very short trip down to the Santa Cruz River, which is very interesting because the Santa Cruz actually travels south. And it travels into Mexico and then does a U-turn and then comes back up into Arizona. And it's going actually south to north when you are there beside the mission. Now, of course, the original mission's on the east side of the river, and I didn't get to see that. And then you have the west side. It's an excellent little short walk, very short walk. It's shaded by all the trees and vegetation. Very nice path, and it's very short, so it's worth the trip because it's very nice. It's just loaded with cottonwoods and stuff to go down there and sit in the shade and watch the water. The water was running probably only about 6-7 inches, and it wasn't running real heavy, but it was still running. I would not touch the water. It was very clear, so the water's clear and it comes above the ground through there, but I wouldn't want to bathe or do anything in it because of this, with the sources of where it's going through and it's traveling. It's not going to be good consumption, or even I would not want to bathe in that water. But anyhow, you get to see the resources here of the orchards and the stuff and all the grounds. They have a great museum. A lot to do there. So you kind of get this historical aspect of from the first to the second. Of the development of these areas. Now the third area is we left there and then we traveled north back towards Tucson. We had to go through a border checkpoint, which was very simple and easy. Got through there and the group gets up and there's Xavier de Buck. And that is the mission, the white dove of the desert, big deal. Everybody loves it. Well, it's being restored. The interior was open. We were very, very fortunate because we got in and we went to walk over. The mission was closed, but there was a gentleman there with his dog, and the dog was inside the church, and he came out, and I just questioned jokingly that, well, it's closed and we can't go in, but the dog's in there, because the dog turned right around and went back in. And the gentleman was very, very nice and asked me if I would take off my Stetson and be respectful. He had no problem with leaving it open for a short time still. So that allowed not only all of us to go in and take a look around and get some photographs, but there were some other people that had just shown up and were late too. We all got to kind of go in and kind of do that. The church inside is magnificent. They've done the restorations. They had it the church kind of closed off at the pews, at the back of the pews at this time. Still doesn't matter. We still got to go in, and it was just absolutely just eye-opening. I'm not a religious, I'm not a spiritual guy, but it's a very, very cool place, and you want to spend hours just looking at the detail of the woodwork and the stonework inside there. They're still still restoring the exterior. Since the last January we were there, it looks like they've gotten around, got a lot of work done, but now that the interior is open and so forth. So we got to walk around, take a look around. I realized at that point, with these various settlements and all the things I've done, I've kind of walked in a lot of footsteps of De Anza, but as well as Kino and other people. And so the kind of that historical sense is kind of comes upon you. I'm very happy I made the trip. It was a long trip. I mean, putting in, well over 400 miles in a single day. But not only that, but putting in the 2 missions and the fort garrison as well. Good food, and of course rewarded myself with a really good steak once I got back up into Phoenix. But it was a great trip, and one of the reasons I wanted to put it in here in Chasing Legends, because a lot of times we throw something in here and it's more historical context. And a lot of people would say, well, it's just your trip and maybe some pictures and stuff from the trip. But what I'm looking at is, well, why? Well, one of the things I try to always encourage in this channel is I want people to pick up books. I'll say, here's a reference, pick up this book, get a hold of this, here's a great resource. We live in a time where people want to just grab some stuff off the internet that necessarily isn't very verifiable. And I always make those claims, like everybody says, use a drone. And I say, no, I put like my feet on the ground. Well, in this case, it's the same thing. In context, I like learning about things, but I love being there physically and then picking up books and then understanding more, because once I've been there, I kind of have an idea where I close my eyes and it's not a photograph I'm thinking of. It's a very real place. Being down there, I know what the dirt feels like under my feet. I know what it sounds like as everybody's shuffling through the missions, whether it's Tumakakori or Xavier de Buck. I know what the smell is. I know what I was smelling and where, it just makes a huge difference to me. And I always want to encourage people, as these are very cool places, but I just don't want you to pick up the book and read the book and then imagine and then speculate on what could have been with the Jesuits or the Franciscans and this and that. When you're there, it becomes very much real to you about the people that were there and what happened in those situations in those given places. So I could sit there and pull together some numbers and some dates and years and then speculate and opine about various things that could have happened with the Jesuits and about their expulsion and different things. And it's a lot that's interesting to some extent. But I think the bigger important part is, if you go there, there's a reward to this. It's just the same to people that I understand not everybody can get into the Superstition Mountains, but if you get there to the foothills, if you make the trip into Hieroglyphic Canyon or something, you get to feel the presence. It changes a bit. A lot of people that are treasure hunters and Dutch hunters to some extent, even though I wouldn't say someone who just kind of like breaks into it a little bit as a Dutch hunter. But you get people that travel into the mountains, spend a little bit of time in the mountains and in specific areas where they found things on Google Maps, and they consider themselves kind of a Dutch hunter. And that necessarily isn't true, because a Dutch hunter actually spends significant time in the mountains. They spend a significant time researching. But I would think almost everyone would agree with me, you wouldn't really think of someone as a Dutch hunter who hasn't spent extensive time in the mountains, no matter how much time of research and this and that they put in. Because until you get there, you don't know what it's like. You don't know the feel. You don't know what it smells like. You don't know where you're at. People tend to say, well, this was carved here. Well, can you tell? Did you actually look at it? Do you have photography of that site that shows this is a carving, or it's just something natural that you're kind of matrixing into something? And a lot of times say, well, no, I don't got the photographs. And that's important. Why I always believe, go down. I'm not an expert on the Jesuits or missions by no stretch of the imagination, but actually visiting these places and then revisiting places and taking photographs and then picking up anything I can find down there. I think one of the books I picked up was a research on material in the 1935 archaeological expedition. And I'll read through that, and I'll become a little better acquainted. So when someone else is telling me something, I'll just kind of know basically, I'll have a good basic grasp, and then I'll find out other things about other things. San Xavier, is just an awesome place. Anybody that's down there. But like I said, if you're down there, why not hit Tumakakori and the Presidio? So many other things down in that area that you can just in one day it. But one of the problems we ultimately run into is it's so much more fun to go into someplace and be someplace where it's much more fantastic and things are blown out of proportion and visit. You know, I understand the Grand Canyon is a pretty awesome place and stuff, even if you don't hike it, just to drive along, take pictures and hit those areas. But in each one of these places, there wasn't a lot of walking involved. I think they're pretty wheelchair accessible, I'm thinking. There's some steps and some things, but I think if you have someone with you, you can get through. They're just really awesome, and I as much as I could present, even if filmed in there, and it was very difficult because there's other people around and you can't control other people's conversations. So one of the problems you're always going to have in that aspect, that space, is just these various voices. And of course, they're very narrow. Xavier de Buck is pretty narrow, but it is nothing narrow compared to Tumakakori. That place, I was like, did they have enough room to even sit a single pew down the center? It was very narrow, surprisingly narrow to me, but they figured it out. Maybe people were much smaller, only 3 feet tall at that time, but I was looking at it and putting it in context as how narrow this was and how this, and then I was looking at, you know, the Presidio, there's nothing really remains, but I was looking at these missions and realized if something happened and people were inside, they had no warning. There was no real windows ventilation. They weren't meant to be defensive. They were not meant to be places that they could fight from. They were just meant to be places to celebrate, you know, their faith. And you can feel that. That is one important thing in all these places. You can understand, especially in both those missions, you understand these were places of faith, and you can feel the faith that these people had, that they would just doggedly were determined to continue to establish them and put them in there. And I think it's a lesson learned. So what I would say is, as much as you read it, living it or feeling it or breathing it or touching it is very, very important. Again, and I can just go on and on about this stuff, but that's one of the things I always want to do, is get you interested. Maybe you see some things, you hear some things, I'm talking about these things, and you become more interested and want to make that trip. And you make that trip, and then you go down and you make that trip to several of these places, which when we were at the Presidio, nobody was at the Presidio. Nobody was really on the grounds. There was a few groups that kind of wandered through, but it was almost just empty. And it was a beautiful day. A woman came up selling cornbread and tuna sandwiches in the morning when we first pulled up. But then you take the next step. In Tumakakori, there were people, but it was nothing, not busy. But it was still a beautiful, wonderful day. In Xavier de Buck, there was just almost as many res dogs running around the property as there were people. So they're really nice places. They're very quiet. I do know Tumakakori had, there was an app where it actually, on your phone, you could actually listen and it would do the self-guided tour, which is very nice. Presidio, they all had the little handbooks that you could take with you and read and go through. And then, of course, Xavier de Buck, I didn't really bother with any of that, knowing a little more familiar with the history. I was there and just so happy that we got to go inside. So excellent 2 weeks for me, or a week or 9-day week for me, because not only the rendezvous and all the events and the people I got to see and revisit, and a lot of new friends at the rendezvous that we made, but then again, moving down and going down south of Tucson and these areas, and all the great people I got to meet down there, and a lot of the great time I got to have. Again, I'm going to recommend, Tubac Jack's Saloon. The food was awesome. So, but if you're down that way, those are places particularly to take in. They do have reference materials and stuff you can pick up. I think everybody that was down there, we were all picking up books. I grabbed 3 or 4, and then there was some ones that I'd read before that I really recommended, that people picked up on my recommendation, which always makes me happy. Makes me scared, because I don't always know if people will like the books I like. But I always like to recommend these really good books. The 2 that I really recommended heavily was Black Legend, which is about Cochise and the Bascom affair. And then the other one was The Devil's Highway, about the border and the migrant people and all that, which kind of looks at it from all sides. And I really enjoyed it. That was a recommended book from someone down in Tucson during the film festival. I read the book, and then I fell in love with it and ended up eating it up and reading it a couple times. But again, coupling that book and the experience and having the place, so I always feel good when someone says there, and then they come up with some, and I'm not going to say cock and I guess I did say it, but someone starts telling me a story about something, and I'm like, well, I got a feel for it. But not only did I read about it, but I've been down there, and I got a good feel for it, and I kind of understand it. And then one of the things I always say is, have you been there? And then they go, well, no, why? And then I go, well, I've been there, and I have tons of photographs. There are things that I don't always understand, markings on some rocks and stuff that I'll be looking into further, but I can't always put the treasure stories and the superstitions and this stuff with the Jesuits and all this stuff, because I realized they had so much, their hands full, so much with what was going on. The settlements usually were anywhere from 60 to 100 people, many of them being Pimas, but unless they were revolting, and then they were tearing and raising everything down. But when you look at the number of people there and so forth, and what you were looking at and what continued to happen, I kind of start putting the treasure hunting, treasure story stuff to the side and start thinking about the real people and the lives lost and what happened to people down there and how the struggle of them trying to win their way through. And you're even talking during a time period that they went from the Spanish government to the independent Mexican government to the United States. And they probably didn't get much more protection all the way through each of these levels. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I really hope you did. And, you kind of go through this and it entices you. You're going to make a trip out here and make that trip to the Superstition Mountains, visit the museum in Goldfield Ghost Town and the superstitions, and you say, let's get a car and let's go down this way. Let's drive the 400 miles or so and let's check these places out too, because I think that's all a bigger part of it. And I always like to say, when people kind of question some of this stuff and all, I am a Don. I'm one of the members of the Dons of Arizona. I've been around for 90 some odd years. I'm a member of the Historical Society and the museum. I do run the Dutch Hunter Rendezvous, and I'm also part, along with my good friend Bob Shoes, we do the Victory Club's Treasure Hunter of the Year Award, which is kind of the Hall of Fame inductions. This year will be the 30th annual. So I always kind of look at things as I have a lot of time invested in kind of the historical aspects. Know a lot of people who are authors and historians and so forth, which is one of those things at the Rendezvous. You came down and you'd find guys from Legend of the Superstition Mountains, Lost Gold, Ice Cold Gold, the various different things we've been. You had the guys from Lust for Gold, Race Against Time. Casey Morgan came out and spent a little time with us from Dave Turn's Lost Gold and the Gold Rush family on Discovery. So it was very cool. You come out and you not only find these authors and these historians, a number of people, you find these guys from TV and films that you've seen. So the Rendezvous is very cool like that too. And part of all this is trying to get everybody always to have something interactive where you guys get to hear from us kind of this stuff, and then we spur you on, telling you what it is. Like other people will sit there and tell you blatantly what it is, isn't very, very good. What we always want to do is share with you and have you learn and go out and grasp and grab your own things. If you're not getting a book or picking up a book or going to visit the place, then I've kind of not really been successful. But thanks very much for watching. My name's Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And I'll catch you next time here on Chasing Legends.